Steve Yapsley.
Radio Bristol.
And I welcome my final guest of the day in the studio. It's Juliet Gellatley, is that right?
Gellatley.
Gellatley. Where does that come from then?
It's actually Scottish, although I think people like to think it's Italian, so they go Gellatley.
Yes, that's what it reminded me of. Ice cream, yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming in. Juliet is the founder and director of the vegan charity Viva, with an exclamation mark.
Always.
And Viva is the UK's leading vegan campaigning charity. We're going to talk about that. It's Bristol-based, of course, on Wilder Street in the city of Bristol. And we'll talk about veganism, for and against. I shall play devil's advocate with Juliet. But let's talk a bit about you, first of all. Where are you from? Where were you born?
Stockport, which is south of Manchester.
Yeah, and how long did you live there for then?
I left to go to university when I was 18 and didn't go back.
Now, you've got a degree in zoology and psychology,
I
haven't
have.
you? Yeah, what was it like, your university experience?
It was interesting because I think I had rose-tinted spectacles thinking, I'm going to study zoology because I have a fascination and respect for animal life. And you get there and, in fact, you find that a lot of people actually see them as commodities and sort of things to basically experiment on. And so I had, quite a bit of difficulty. I would go into the first lecture of whatever new subject I decided to do, and they'd be doing things like peeling away the egg of with a little chick inside with its little heart beating. And I'd just walk out and think, right, well, I'm not doing that because they're going to be doing vivisection every lecture. So it was challenging, but I in fact I got to the subjects that I love, and my love is ethology, which is like studying animals in the wild. So I was able to study things like dolphin communication, chimpanzee communication, and that's really what I was doing zoology for.
You got your degree in the end.
I did. It was fine in the end, yeah.
Had you, since childhood then, had a deep love of animals?
I had, because I used to ask my mum about that, and she'd say, you used to just fight for the underdog. They're her words, not mine. And often the underdog, of course, is animals. They've got no voice, So, yeah, but I think there's just something in me. So I can remember like rescuing a cat that clearly was a stray, and she gave birth to 3 kittens in my wardrobe when I was about 10 years old. My mum wasn't that thrilled about that. So things like that did happen in my life. Clearly, as a kid, I did love animals, yeah.
We've had a strange relationship with animals throughout the centuries, though, in that many people, of course, adore animals and keep them as pets. And at the same time, we've always exploited animals for a variety of different reasons. But it's funny how they tug at our heartstrings. You look at the popularity of things like donkey sanctuaries, where a lot of people put all their money when they die, don't they?
It is. It's one of the biggest charities in the whole of the UK.
Yeah. Now, you've also got a diploma in direct marketing, and you're a qualified nutritional therapist.
Yep.
So you're well-rounded in that respect. When did you originally become a full vegan, and how did it come about?
Okay, so I went vegetarian first. So there's a little story in that. Do you want to hear?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I was brought up in a household that everybody ate meat, fish, eggs, the whole lot. So there was nothing that was pro-vegetarian there. But like you've just said, I liked animals, and I started to get information through, because obviously this is pre-Google, just through the post on animal welfare, and something came through on factory farming. So I spoke to my parents about it and various people at school, etc., and pretty much everyone was saying, I think this is just an exaggeration. I don't think it's that bad. And so being a little bolshy so-and-so by the time I became a young teenager, I thought, I'm going to see it for myself and just know the truth, thinking it would be quite an easy thing to do. Being, again, very naive and not realising the industry likes to hide it all away and they don't exactly invite people in. In fact, though, I did manage to do it in my mid-teens, and I went with a university student who was studying agriculture, and I did see it for myself, and it was, I guess, one of those life-changing moments that you never forget, because I went into this huge pig shed, which the animals never got to see daylight or anything. And they were all back then in these individualised cages, all stacked next to each other. And they were all pregnant females, and they were called sow stalls. And I could see that some of them would never be able to lie down throughout their pregnancy. And I was walking down the gangway, and at the end of this huge shed, there was a huge male who was about the size of a Shetland pony. I had no idea pigs grew that big. And he was in a bad way. He was in a pen, and he sort of dragged himself towards me, and he was salivating, his back leg had gone, and we just locked eyes. And I just looked around this huge shed with hundreds of animals just cramped in there in appalling conditions. And I can just remember saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I walked out of that place sort of a different person, thinking, okay, factory farming is really bad. It's much worse than I thought. And went home and talked to my mum, and my mum was very sympathetic to animals, like you just said. She liked cats and dogs very much, so she liked wildlife. And very uncomfortable with what I was telling her. And I said, Mum, I've got to go vegetarian. And she's like, oh, but I don't know what to feed you. But I did. I jumped to vegetarian, and bless her, she went vegetarian with me. My dad was different. It took him about 20 years to change. But we changed as a family together. And then when I became an adult and post my degree, I lived in a house, it was in the Cheshire countryside actually, and there's a field that my garden backed onto, and a cow, a female dairy cow, she gave birth to twins, which is quite unusual. And the farmer who we knew and his worker, they came and lifted the calves up, and they were running up basically up the road, and I went running after them saying, what's going to happen to those calves? And they said they're going to be trucked off for veal. And I just thought, I can't support. I'm vegetarian. Why am I supporting this? And I went into the house and I literally poured the milk away and decided, okay, I'm going vegan. If you're going to do it, do it. You know.
It's interesting that it was a pig that caught you in the eye, because a pig is a very clever animal, isn't it? I mean, they have been compared to dogs in some respects.
They have, and in fact, I only had the real privilege of getting to know pigs properly when Dean Farm Sanctuary in Chepstow rescued a mother pig with the 6 piglets who are only about 3 weeks old. And I went to see them every week. So these piglets really got to know me. And and they blew me away on their intelligence, which just shows my ignorance. But and their family bonding, my goodness me, they are close family units. You know, they're very, very protective of each other. And I really admired them and got to know them. And they like, lollop over for belly rubs. Like, you know, if they like you as soon as you're there, and all the little noises that they make. And they love back massages much more than a dog, because I've loved dogs all my life. So they love proper massages, you know, going into the back and the spine and all that. And they talk to you. They're highly, highly intelligent creatures.
Why is it that some animals, I'm talking about in Britain now, are acceptable to eat, like cows and pigs, sheep, etc., whereas other animals like dogs and horse, for instance, which are eaten abroad, fill us with horror? And yet essentially you're eating meat of an animal, aren't you? It's
our culture. It's what we're told from when we're growing up, you know, because you rely on your parents for the truth, don't you? Back then, you completely believe what they're saying, and they're telling you it's okay to eat pigs and chickens and cows, but it's absolutely not okay to eat your pet cat and dog. That's disgusting. And they draw these moral lines, and we believe them, and we absorb them, and we take them on board. If you're in another country, like back then when I was a kid, you know, Italians would have eaten horses and found that acceptable, although it's becoming a lot less so. So cultures change and they shift as people become educated and they start to challenge things they've always been told, and also look at the consequences of what you're doing. So now in the UK, we're starting to shift those perceptions that it's normal to eat all these animals because of environmental consequences, because of factory farming and slaughterhouses, because they've actually been exposed, and also because of our health, because the science on health is becoming very strong, and that vegans actually thrive and get a lot less of the chronic diseases. So we're shaking things up. We're a very educated society. If you look at the world as a whole, we only went into the Industrial Revolution relatively recently in our history. Since then, we've become a much more educated society. Everybody's educated free of charge in the UK. I say that because we've got an organisation in Uganda that I run, and we take for granted how educated we are here. And that means that as a society, you evolve and you start to examine those ideas that you've been told as being normal and good, and start to think, well, actually, what are the consequences of what we're doing? And yet, we as humans are omnivores. We have canine teeth, and we would eat animals if we were wild animals, you know, prehistory, before civilization began. What is wrong with eating humanely reared outdoor animals who are killed humanely as part of a well-rounded diet? Okay, well, a couple of things there. We have got canines, but so have all the great apes. We're one of 5 existing great apes left on the planet, including mountain gorillas and chimpanzees, etc. And they've all got canines, and sometimes really big ones. But sometimes they do eat each other, I have heard. Yeah. Well, mountain gorillas definitely don't. They're much more peace-loving than us. But some apes do eat meat. Well, chimpanzees eat about it depends on the group, but between 1% and 4% of their entire diet comes from animal products. So that means 96 to 99% isn't. So if you look at our physiology and our digestive physiology, then you'll find that it's incredibly similar to gorillas, for example, to the degree where we've shown them to medical students and they haven't actually been able to tell the difference. And so we've got relatively long intestines because we've evolved over a long time to be very good at digesting plant materials. We're not herbivores like a cow because we don't digest cellulose, but we're what's classed by zoologists as so-called frugivores. That means we eat fruits, nuts, shoots, roots, all the vegetables, and so on and so on and so forth, and we thrive on them. That doesn't mean to say that our ancestors never ate meat, because we were incredibly opportunistic. And when we moved into cold times, like in the Ice Age, if you can get nutrition from killing another animal, we as a species, because we were capable of doing it, certainly would have done. Of course we would. That doesn't mean to say that you thrive on a meat-centred diet, because we certainly don't. But we do thrive on a plant-based diet, and that's very telling in itself. So if you look at us and look what we look like, we don't look like a lion, do we? We don't look like a wolf. We look like a gorilla or a chimpanzee, and gorillas eat almost zero, apart from insects, of animal products in their diet, when they certainly could. They're very strong animals. We in Viva, Uganda, we protect the mountain gorillas. I've sat next to them. They are enormous. Yeah. So I just wanted to just sort of talk about that.
It is an issue, the fact that because we have evolved control over fire and developed cooking techniques that have in effect processed meat into a more palatable, tasty, and you might not like meat, but there's no doubting that many people find it delicious to eat because of the way we prepare it these days. Almost by a consequence of our own ingenuity, we've made it a desirable product.
It's a really interesting question, actually, because there's a whole book I was reading recently which is about how fire and cooking has enabled us to get a lot more nutrition out of plants as well very quickly, so that we needed to spend a lot less time eating. And with the meat thing, you're absolutely right. It's almost impossible for us as human beings to... We certainly can't kill with our bare hands. You imagine jumping on the back of a pig, they're really strong animals, or a cow. I mean, they would think you were the most pathetic thing. We haven't got the nails, they're not claws, so we can't break through the skin. We haven't got the shape of the jaw, because actually, if you think about it, every natural carnivore on the planet that's a mammal, their jaws stick right out, they jut out, and they've got this enormous strength in those jaws, whereas our jaws are like the other great apes. We simply cannot hold struggling prey in our mouths. They've just not been geared up to it. So yes, you're right. We can't bite into that cow and rip out the muscle meat and the bones and crunch through them. We just simply couldn't digest it. We'd be very ill. So we have to cook it, which is another indication that we're not a true carnivore, of course, because that's exactly what true carnivores do.
What would you say to those people listening now who love meat and say, you're just being a killjoy, let me enjoy my food?
Is that a deliberate pun, killjoy? Oh, well, that's the thing. Vegan food is evolved so much. I was interviewing the CEO of Grubby yesterday that make vegan recipe kits, and they are so delicious. Every meal that they sell takes less than 30 minutes to prepare, and they're all delicious. And Viva has V7, which is just dip your toe into trying vegan food for 1 week. So if you just Google Viva V7, you'll find it. And the reason I'm saying that is because please do, because all the recipes, they're imaginative, but they're easy, and really tasty. So I think vegan food, I mean, we all know this from the restaurant chains, don't we? It used to be just 7 years ago, they barely had a vegan option. Now you go into somewhere like Wagamama and they claim 50% of their menu is vegan. I mean, how times have changed.
I was going to mention that because, I mean, I've been a vegetarian for 40 years and although it's not been hard to find vegetarian food, the choices available these days, and particularly the boom in vegan food over the last 5 years or so, has been surprising and staggering. I mean, you've been banging on about this for a long time. You must be amazed at the way it has ballooned in recent years.
Yes. I mean, we've been working at this for... Viva's 31 years old this year. And I have seen huge changes because, believe it or not, I was the first person in the UK to campaign on vegetarianism back in the 1980s. I became the director of the Vegetarian Society. And when I started on that, vegetarianism was seen as being radical, believe it or not. So in my lifetime, in my adult working lifetime, I've seen phenomenal change in the UK. And we are held up as a great example, actually, by other countries of being progressive in terms of our diet, because we're held up as an example of a nation that actually genuinely cares about animals in the environment, and that we're working towards sustainability. We've got a long way to go, but we are definitely progressive.
Now, one thing we must mention is the fact that a vegetarian diet is a more sustainable and cheaper. I mean, it costs a lot of money to raise a cow, doesn't it?
It does. It takes a lot of money, but also from an environmental perspective, the worst possible thing is the amount of land that they take. So sometimes people say, is it okay to eat free range? But obviously, with the billions of people on this planet, there's no way, there's simply enough planet Earth to actually feed people free range, even if we wanted to. But actually, if you look at the environmental damage, it's absolutely appalling from free range, because the biggest damages of the planet are dairy cows and beef cows. And in fact, I was reading today, and in fact, I took a sharp intake of breath, because I gave a speech, I remember, because it was a big speech. I had a huge audience 5 years ago, and we said something like 80,000. There were 80,000 fires in the Amazon that year. 5 years on, there's 140,000 in 2024. And why does that matter? Because they're deliberately setting fire to this incredible rainforest. For what? For cattle ranching and to grow fodder, which is imported where? The UK and the EU for pigs and chicken feed. So why does this matter? Because we're destroying the last wildernesses of our planet. Now, the Amazon rainforest holds 1/10 of land life on the whole planet. And it produces so much of our oxygen, and yet we're just, you'd think from a self-preservation we'd stop doing it, but we're not. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And the reason that I'm saying that is because a lot of people don't realise that actually consuming meat and dairy is the number one driver of loss of wildlife species on our planet. And so even from that perspective, I love wildlife, as you probably imagine. You go vegan or get on that road to vegan. Even if you're, say, having half your meals as vegan a week, that is a massive difference, because just choosing a vegan meal over a meat-based meal, just one meal, it cuts its global warming gas emissions by about half and the impact on wildlife by about half. So it's much less damaging to the environment to be a vegan.
What's your view of meat substitute products, vegan products, that replicate meat? Because I often have these, and you'll have something like a steak or a burger, and to me, from what I remember, it tastes identical to meat. Some vegans and vegetarians have a problem with that. They don't want to be reminded of it. Others miss what they used to have and like to have an alternative. What's your own view?
My view is that it's a brilliant way of transitioning, because if you've been brought up all your life on eating a certain way, let's say you like, I don't know, beef mince in a spag bol, and that's your favourite dish, or a chili con carne, then all you have to do is switch to vegan mince, because we've done so many taste tests and people cannot taste the difference. And often, actually, they prefer the vegan mince variety. So there are so many replicas, if you like, that are much better for your health, or even if they're not better for your health, they don't harm any animal and they're much less harmful to the environment as well. So my view is do whatever it takes to transition over. There've been new makes like Juicy Marble have brought out, I don't know if you've tried the big steaks. Have you tried those?
It's part of the Valentine's meal, I think, at a supermarket I saw the other day, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not cheap, though, to be honest.
They're not, but for £4.50 per person, they're like sort of like these big juicy steak. Well, they're not big in size, but when you eat them, they're actually very filling. And they are exactly, they've got that taste and texture of a steak, so they give that satisfaction if that's what you still want. How
have you felt about the supermarkets jumping on the vegan bandwagon, which they have done in the last few years? I know some of them have now drawn back slightly on their range. There was a big craze, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, where it really went mad for a while, and they have reined that in a little bit more. But nonetheless, a lot of supermarkets are producing vegan ranges, which they would have never done in the past.
Yeah, I think what happened was the alternative meats, if you like, the vegan meats, there was an absolute boom in them, which started around 2017. And being honest, any market that has that huge boom, you're bound to get a consolidation. It just happens. It's natural. And to be honest, the ones that weren't so good have closed down. Other ones have been bought out, or the supermarkets are doing their own replicas at a cheaper, rate. So in fact, like I say, I was talking to the manufacturers of these vegan recipe kits yesterday, and they said the alternative meat market is stronger than ever. People are choosing them more. It's very, very healthy. So So I think it's just going to get better, and people are going to demand a higher quality. And the other thing that's happened, we've gone through in Britain this phase of really wanting loads of sort of replica vegan meats, and what people are going back to is cooking and celebrating from plants themselves. It's like we go through cycles, don't we? But veganism itself is more popular than ever.
Why do you think there has been this boom? What is the factor that has made the difference, that has spurred people to try it?
Definitely the actual science on our health. And these things have sort of have come together. We've been campaigning on what's happened to animals, the invention of social media. So that I'd say with Viva from about 2016, actually being able to show people on a scale that we simply couldn't before what was happening inside factory farms, and the big names, I'm talking about the really big names that we were exposing over and over and over, and it was really starting to have an impact. On health, there have been a lot of science. So the World Health Organization came out around exactly that same time and said, in fact, red meat is a class 2 carcinogen, and processed meats, burgers and sausages and bacon is a class 1 carcinogen. So it definitely causes cancer, no argument. So all these things are sort of seeping through. Heart disease is still one of the biggest killers in the UK, only topped by dementia. And one of the biggest problems with heart disease is obviously raised cholesterol levels. What raises your cholesterol levels? It's animal fats. So eating things like the hard cheeses, the butters, the red meats. So all these messages are coming through. And then on top of all that, if that wasn't enough, the environmental messages have got a lot more serious, especially with climate change. And so a lot of the bigger organisations that have worked on climate change started to finally say about 10 years ago, actually, we need to move towards a plant-based diet. And they'd never been brave enough to say that before, and now they say it quite boldly. So 3 main reasons, all this coming together.
Do you think there'll be a time, 200 years in the future, when very few people will eat meat?
Absolutely. And in fact, I don't know if you're aware, just about 3 days ago, they launched the first cultivated meat dog snacks in Pets at Home. And what I mean by cultivated meat is it's not made from animals, it's animal cells, but it's grown in a lab, and it tastes absolutely identical as if they'd actually slaughtered those animals. What it means is that you don't get all the environmental damage, you don't get antibiotic use, because they're cells in a lab, they don't poo and wee, so you haven't got all the pollution from it. And of course, you're not killing the animals, you haven't got the moral issues. So I think what will start is that pet food is a huge market, is that cats and dogs will go over to cultivated meat, and then it'll start to become acceptable to us. So why would you put animals through factory farming and slaughter when you can have literally the identical product without doing that? So I think that's going to satisfy that market. And as people transition and move over to plant-based, and it just gets better and better, you've got people like Alexis Gauthier, top Michelin star French chef who's now vegan, with his restaurants in London. They are superb. Can't recommend it enough. When you've got people like that cooking such superb vegan food, it's going to ripple through, and people are going to realise, actually, what is the point in killing all these animals and having all that environmental damage and health damage when we can do it a better way? And also, the other point is, if the human population keeps going, we just simply don't have the land to feed everybody a meat-centred diet. We seriously do not have the land, because eating meat takes up 83% of farmland on the planet, but only gives us back less than 20% of our calories. So plants or what gives us most of our nutrition, what we need to do, but using a lot less land, if that makes sense. And that's where we need to head. And the World Wildlife Fund, Greenpeace, along with Viva, and many other organisations, including the United Nations, are saying the whole world needs to go towards plant-based.
Well, you've argued your case very strongly, I have to say. We'll have to get a butcher or a farmer on the programme next week to balance it out. Thank you so much for coming in today, Julia. If people want to find out more, they only have to look at the website, which is viva.org.uk. And, of course, the charity itself is based in Bristol on Wilder Street. Have you got any sort of big projects planned for this year?
In fact, we're doing Halfway Heroes, which is encouraging the whole of the British public to go halfway vegan as a starting point. Because what we find is when people actually open their eyes and their stomachs to going vegan, then they tend to move along pretty rapidly. Just to show them how positive it is for the environment to go halfway would make such a huge impact. And the other bit exciting thing, really quickly, we're doing the first ever anti-dairy cinema ad, which is kind of like done in a spoof horror feel, which is going to be launching across the major films later in the spring. So that's exciting for us too.
Well, you are full of energy. Juliet, thank you for coming in today.
It's a pleasure.
That is Juliet Gellatley, the founder and director of the vegan charity Viva, which is based in Bristol. More details at viva.org.uk.